Five Nights at Freddy's. What is there to say that already hasn't been said about the franchise? From the last attempt of a struggling indie game developer to a $1 million franchise with a movie on the way, FNaF has seen a lot. Yet, in my personal opinion, despite all of the installments being unique games in their own right, I still think the original Five Nights at Freddy's is the best and scariest game in the franchise. Each of the following games have something missing that made the first game creepy in the first place, except for possibly FNaF 6, but I've never played it. And today we'll be going over those missing aspects that make FNaF stand out among the rest of the games in the series. Without further ado, let us begin. One of the greatest strengths of the original Five Nights at Freddy's is the crushing atmosphere of the game. You are stuck in a crowded, claustrophobic office with no way to escape. The game's ambience is brutal and unrelenting, the player's ears being constantly stimulated with a mix of helpful and unhelpful sounds. Background visuals morph from time to time. The setting, ambience, and other factors give the impression that not only are the animatronics alive, but the entire place itself is, and it's not only alive, but also angry and miserable. The other games in the series don't have as much of a crushing vibe to them. FNaF 2, while having more intense gameplay, relies much less on atmosphere to scare you. FNaF 3 doesn't really have that much intensity to it. FNaF 4 is almost as oppressive and crushing in its feeling as FNaF 1 is, but there are other factors to the game that make it less scary than FNaF 1. And sister location is, well, sister location. The more modern games also don't have that same and oppressive claustrophobic atmosphere that FNaF 1 had, with the possible exception of Pizzeria Simulator. Security Breach is a really good example of a game that doesn't really have that much of an atmosphere to it. You're stuck in a wide open area where you can see anything coming at you from a mile away. That's all I'm going to comment on Security Breach because I haven't played the game at all, but you get the idea at this point. Another reason why FNaF 1 is the best in this series is the design of the animatronics. While the designs by themselves never really scared me, I can see why they would scare other people, being directly in the uncanny valley, lifelike enough to seem human but still robotic enough to be anything but. Bonnie in particular is a good example of this, his eyes and body giving the appearance of something that is alive but shouldn't be. The animatronics in the other games aren't as scary, being somewhere in between looking cool and being goofy, with some exceptions that are pretty terrifying to look at. While this is not nearly as important, I do think that the story of the original FNaF game was handled pretty well for what it was worth. Being clear enough in that story that you can get the essentials, while being vague enough that you could draw any conclusion up from it and have it set up for any potential sequels, which the original game would have. I'm not going to say that the story in FNaF was the best. I think the third game actually deserves that credit. But the first three games, maybe the fourth game, are all at the level where the lore is still convoluted, but it still makes sense. Admittedly, Scott Cawthon has many strengths in his game development, but storytelling is definitely not one of them, as he appears to take the J.K. Rowling approach of laying down the tracks as the train's coming through. You cannot fucking convince me that anything past the fourth game wasn't pure improvisation. Anyways, on to the main reason why I think FNaF is the best game in the series. Back in 2017, a YouTuber called Etra Games uploaded a video about a lot of the gameplay loops that you see in FNaF games. I will put a link to the video in the description, but essentially, most traditional FNaF games will have a strategy that works 100% of the time. In FNaF 2, you would just have to check the vents and hallways and wind up the music box, putting the mask on if anyone is in the vents or in your office. In FNaF 3, you keep Springtrap on one camera and lure him back if he leaves. In FNaF 4, you check the left door, right door, closet, and then bed. The main sister location game is Free Roam, but the Custom Night does have a strategy to it, as does Ultimate Custom Night. Help Wanted and Security Breach aren't really applicable here due to Help Wanted being a mini-game collection, and Security Breach being literally every single mascot horror game ever. The exceptions to these rules are the first FNaF game and the sixth. But as I've never really played the sixth game, we're focusing on the first one. The original Five Nights at Freddy's has two major strategies that have their own sets of advantages and disadvantages. However, in order to understand how the strategies work, we must understand how the animatronics function. Also, I recorded the next part at 11 o'clock, which is why I sound weird. In the original Five Nights at Freddy's, there are four major animatronics you need to worry about: Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, and Chica. Bonnie and Chica are the easiest to deal with, being that all you need to do is check the lights to see if they're at the door and shut it before they get in. Freddy and Foxy, on the other hand, are much harder to deal with, and will throw a wrench into the two main strategies depending on which one you use. Foxy will stay at Pirate's Cove, but will slowly come out of the area to make a mad dash to your office, which is when you need to shut the door to send him away, but not before taking a chunk of your power. But he can be stalled by the cameras being checked. Freddy, meanwhile, will move towards your office, and if you're not checking on him on the camera and you don't shut the door, he will get into your office. And if you do shut the door, he won't leave that general area, meaning that you're going to have to close the door again if you're going to check on somewhere else. However, if you keep the camera directly on where he is, it doesn't matter if you're using it or not because he will never leave that part. This has resulted in two main strategies. In the first strategy, you shut the east door, check the cameras, put the cameras down, open up the east door, check the eastern light, check the western light, then repeat it all over again. In the second strategy, you alternate between checking the east light, putting the camera onto cam 4B, flipping the camera down, and then checking the left one, then checking the camera again, and vice versa. The second option saves way more power than the first one, being that using the camera you can stall Freddy and keep him directly at that place, and also continuous use of the camera will continue to stall Foxy. And the strategy is also generally more economical and saves power better. The problem with that strategy is, even though continuous camera use should stall Foxy, he will come out eventually, and if you continue on that strategy, you have no idea when or how he's going to come out. So ultimately, even though the strategy saves more power, it leaves you more vulnerable to other attacks due to things that you can't focus on, and leaves one major character in an unknown position. For the other strategy, while your safety is guaranteed and you will know what Foxy is doing at all times, as well as all the other animatronics, it costs way more power to use, and ultimately leaves you more vulnerable to Freddy when the power runs out. So either way, depending on which major strategy you use, there is always an unknown, or something isn't always guaranteed to go right. Either the fear of invulnerability or the dread of power running out. And this is infinitely more creepier and complex than the more intense but more predictable gameplay of the future games. And while the claustrophobic and crowded ambience and the uncanny character design are big reasons as to why FNaF is good in the first place, it's ultimately the lack of control in the gameplay that makes it the best in this series. However, this is all just my opinion. If you have another FNaF game that's your favorite in the series, let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next upload. Goodbye.